Welcome to the ICA. I'm Monica Garza, the ICA's Director of Education. And tonight's program with artists Faith Wilding and Beryl Korot and Mannion Family Senior Curator Jenelle Porter is part of the ICA's ongoing lecture series, The Artist's Voice. This series highlights the different art practices of today's leading artists and thinkers, and tonight is no exception. So let me just read you some very, very brief bios of our speakers. Your CVs are extensive, so these are very brief. Faith Wilding received her BA from the University of Iowa and an MFA at Cal Arts, where she was a founding member of the Feminist Art Program, the first of its kind in American higher education. Since then, Faith has performed, installed, and exhibited her work internationally. Venues include the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, the Whitney Museum of American Art, Singapore Art Museum, and ICA Boston. Now, some of you may remember her work was also included in the 2011 exhibition here at the ICA called Dance Draw. Faith is currently on the faculty of the Vermont College of Fine Arts. Beryl was the co-editor of Radical Software, an important journal that began in 1970. Her work has also been exhibited in various international venues, such as The Kitchen, Documenta 6, Tate Modern, the Whitney Museum of American Art, and the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum in Connecticut. Beryl is a Guggenheim Fellow and has received numerous grants for her work, including from the National Endowment for the Arts. Faith and Beryl will share the stage tonight with Jenelle Porter. Jenelle has been at the ICA since 2011 and has organized numerous exhibitions featuring artists such as Kathy Butterly, Christina Ramberg, Nick Cave, and Matthew Ritchie. She also organized our beautiful exhibition upstairs, Fiber, Sculpture 1960 to Present. And for those of you who haven't gotten a chance to see the exhibition upstairs yet, please know that our galleries close until 9 p.m. tonight, so you still have a chance to go up afterwards. Now, I need to thank a few people who supported our work at the ICA. Major support for Fiber, Sculpture 1960 to the Present, is provided by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts. Additional support was provided by the National Endowment for the Arts, the Kobe Foundation, and many generous individuals. And now, please help me welcome Faith, Beryl, and Jenelle.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you all for braving the weather with us tonight. It's pretty brutal out there. But we will hopefully offer a lovely fireside chat that will warm your hearts and minds tonight. So thank you for being here with me tonight, ladies. We are going to run through the artist's work. I think one of the great privileges of hearing from artists is hearing them talk about their own work. And so you've seen, for those of you who've seen the exhibition, you've seen very important artworks by both of these women here. Very, very important artworks in the history of art, as well as to the exhibition. So it's very quite auspicious. And so we're going to start with Faith, the farthest from me, with your work. Now, this will be hard to do that thing where I don't want you to talk to the screen. You have to talk to the audience too.
I know, but I have to see what's up there.
So I will tell you what's up there, which is the same work that is on view upstairs. And here is a detail. I think this needs to be focused a tiny bit, guys, if you could sort of sharpen that up. But this work is, of course, Crocheted Environment, also known as Womb Room, that you first made in 1971, too.
It was shown in 1972 at Women House. However, these are not
those
the
pictures.
Same work. This was the one that was at Women House.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so
and there's me, very young.
Tell us, hardly changed. So this is, of course, has become a very famous work of art, and you said something so funny to me when I dragged you back here to install it yet again, which is that Faith said, I made this as a site-specific work. I cannot believe I'm still putting this up. I was a student at the time, so tell us a little bit about this work and the environment in which you made it, what was going on, because this is the very start of your career.
So this was at Women House, which, if you haven't heard about it, you can look it up on Google and Wikipedia even. And actually, the website that my collective does, www.cyberfeminism.net. We're trying to post a lot of images of Women House, actually, because they're very hard to get a hold of. So it was done in the context of Women House, which was a house, sort of an old abandoned mansion on a street in Hollywood, Los Angeles. And it was, Women House was done by 21 students from Cal Arts, from the feminist program at Cal Arts. It was the first feminist art program ever, besides the one in Fresno that had just predated it, that I was also part of. And so each of us chose rooms. We did consciousness raising about what kinds of experiences women have in their homes and in their houses. Did a lot of research on that, and then we picked different rooms. And I picked this room because it was dark, it had no windows, it was between the kitchen and the laundry, and that was quite a challenging space. And I just decided I was interested in this, I'd been doing a lot of research in how women used to build, some of the first shelters, and some of the Native American women were actually the builders of houses, not houses, but and they were usually shaped like this. That's why I keep making this gesture. So I figured out that it needed a grid, and it had to have a support. It's nailed into the floor, nailed into the ceiling. The grid is thick sisal rope, and then I crocheted into it. Crocheting I'd learned as a 6-year-old, but I'd never done anything like this before. However, I'd had a very brilliant weaving teacher, Walt Nottingham, whom you know. He was very appropriately named Nottingham because he made huge shaped weavings and then took them off the loom, and then he would crochet and knot and twine, and he did a lot of commissions for churches and stuff. You and I talked about that, and you said you couldn't locate any of his work, or it was hard to find, but that's sad because I think he was really brilliant. He really inspired me that, all of these handicrafts that I'd learned and practiced as a child, this was my introduction to art, actually, with Walt, So
you made this piece, and then, of course, what happened to it was that
it was stolen.
Yes.
Can you imagine? It was nailed into the floor. So we came to Women House on the next morning after it closed because we wanted to take everything down and take it out of there because it was about to be demolished because they were making an access ramp to the freeway, Hollywood freeway from there, and it was gone. And just, pieces of rope nailed to the floor were still there. It was just gone. And to this day, it remains a mystery. Although one of my friends had dinner a few weeks after that in a Malibu fish restaurant. And she was pretty sure that the netting that was hanging around there was the womb room. So, this is a true apocryphal story. But anyway, so.
And this idea of things sort of, being made and then returning with maybe a vengeance or vigor is that you were commissioned in 1995 to make the piece essentially again that somebody wanted to include it in a show, and you agreed to do so. And so what we have upstairs is actually that recreation of the same work, which is something that happens in art sometimes, which is that the piece doesn't exist anymore, but it can. You remade it. It's a little different than it was, of course.
A lot different.
Oh, it's a lot different. And now it's in our collection, and when Faith came to install it, actually, it sort of gets put up, and then you fill in some places.
Yeah, I mess with it.
Yeah, she messes with it. She might be up there crocheting sometime that you might catch her up there adding to it. I'm not sure.
They tell me I'm not allowed to touch my own work, whatever. What's interesting about this remake.
Here's Woman House. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was actually in a very important show, which was called Division of Labor, Women's Work in Contemporary Art, which Lydia Yee curated at the Bronx Museum in '95. And so she had us redo some of the rooms from Woman House.
Right.
So
That was just
Yeah,
one
so
of them.
that's, so I worked with 2 students, one of whom was Christine Lucas, some of you may know that name, who's a very strong media artist. And she, from Cooper Union, because I was teaching at Cooper Union at the time, so it was a very different experience doing it in the museum in that way.
Yeah,
So,
more than 20 years later.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So now, of course, that's just one of the many works that you've made, and we're sort of good to do that tonight, where you see one thing up, you see one piece by each artist upstairs, but they, of course, have long careers as artists. And here is a picture of some of your drawings or watercolors, correct?
Yes, drawing on watercolor. We were trying, in the feminist art program, we were trying to figure out, was there a female iconology? Could we think about other ways of depicting bodies? And thinking about, thinking back through, others thinking back through female experience of bodies, of domesticity, of the way we'd been treated all of these years. And so I was really interested in mythology. I've always been super interested in mythology. And so I was doing a lot of research on female mythology and reading a lot of women writers like Virginia Woolf and Simone de Beauvoir and lots of novelists and poets. And so I was trying to make sort of these almost sort of creation myths in a certain way, but through symbols like the egg and the chrysalis and the bursting out and the moon and the phases of the moon. So this is very delicately rendered work with drawing and watercolor and gold leaf, and I'm also in love with medieval art and have looked at a lot of illuminated manuscripts. Have been very interested in this idea of illuminated text.
I don't. So Faith, I asked the artists to send me some images that they want to talk about, and a lot of the work I wasn't familiar with, so I'm getting a great kind of studio visit tonight as well. I was very intrigued with this.
Well, now for something completely different.
And we're basically in chronological order, I think, maybe a bit.
More or less,
yeah. More or less, yeah.
But it's interesting because, I didn't go to undergraduate art school. I did comparative literature and, took some art history because I was always interested in art history, but thank God I didn't go to undergraduate art school. I shouldn't say that in front of this group because probably a lot of you are undergraduates in art school right now. But I taught myself how to do, so this was oil painting, and these are huge piece, this is a huge piece, it's like, Shannon, how big is this piece? Like 6 or 7 feet? Shannon here? What? My wonderful curator, Shannon Stratton, is here to help out.
And it's oil painting on
it's
what?
Oil painting on canvas and cut out from the canvas, which you're not supposed to do. But it held up fantastically, right, Shannon? It just came out of the crate, like looking like new. So I did a whole series of leaves. I grew up in South America in the jungle. I'm very romantic about nature and have deep experiences of nature and natural forms. You can.
Yeah. Okay. I was really intrigued with these sort of.
Yeah.
Fabric and. I was thinking again about watercolor.
Yeah. Because these are sort of Winsor Newton watercolor inks, sort of, and I just get these chemistry vessels and put in a whole bunch. Like this is blue. This is blue ink. Oh no, this is the green ink. And it's really, and that's the blue ink. And it's really interesting. It seeps in, it seeps into the material. And, as the show progressed, this was a show at the CCA in Glasgow, Centre for Contemporary Art in Glasgow. And every day people would come, especially children, to see how much further the stain had gone. And I think the show was up for 2 months, and it almost reached the center. And to me, it was such a beautiful metaphor in a way this was a collaborative show with my friend Kate Davis, and I saw these as us flowing towards each other in a way. But also I liked the process because it was like a painting, watercolor process, but it's just like, what is that called? Seepage or something like that? Osmosis? Osmosis?
Chromatography.
Chromatography.
Yes. That's what you're doing. This is analogous to thin layer chromatography. They do it in the laboratories.
Really?
Well, and
Wow.
you know what? And now we get to sort of more more science and bio art.
And now
These are
for
your-
something completely different.
Well, yeah, recombinant. I mean, yeah, we are skipping along a 40-year career.
right. So-
We're going to do that with both of you.
So these, yeah, I'm fascinated to
These
see
are your
what-
recombinants.
Are we
which you
almost
made in the-
done with me?
We are almost done with you.
Good.
Do you want me to go faster?
Well,
Do you want to go there? Do you want to go back to there?
well, these were, I've done quite a lot of work about assisted reproductive technologies, you know, again, thinking about my feminist research and thinking also about bodies and reproduction, but also the connection between certain technologies and reproduction and war. And I've done a lot of, I love armor. It's really, really interesting to me. You know, King Arthur and his knights, I was there. I was really there. And so I made a whole series, I actually made a whole show, which was called Embryo World, which is based on research of creating embryos through various artificial interventive means, and then thinking about the connections between how women are weapons of war, how women have to send their children to war, but also thinking about the kinds of technologies that have been developed for war, but that, like ultrasound, for example, that I use constantly for reproductive purposes and medicine. So these are made of layers of vellum and watercolor and ink and and collage of armor pieces. These are quite large, actually, more than life size.
Okay. And then you've also worked on various sort of activist and performative types of projects. This is a piece you did at Mass MoCA?
With Sabrosa,
Sabrosa.
my feminist collective. And this was work we did about connecting North Adams, where Mass MoCA is, with Ciudad Juarez in Mexico, because North Adams, the factories there, what they were producing was outsourced to Ciudad Juarez. And so we did a lot of research about, what were the conditions of women workers in North Adams and in Ciudad Juarez, and what was available for them. So it was a whole research thing about, and then trying to make this, can you go just back for a second?
Oh, yes. Excuse me.
Here, we made this forensic floor, we called it. You had to pull up these sort of little lids, and inside were little installations that had information and various little scenarios of, chemicals, spills, and all of these different things that connected to North Adams. And then we had these maps of North Adams and of Ciudad Juarez, and we identified different services for women workers. And at the same time, and it's still going on, a lot of young women were actually being abducted and killed and buried in the desert and really horribly mangled. And so we also collaborated with some Mexican artists who sent us posters that they'd made in protest of that. So they're hanging on the wall somewhere too. And so we're connecting this kind of outsourcing of labor and to the actual lives of the people whom that affects. So and we had the clothing tag map.
I was just really taken with this image of you.
This was the beginning of a performance and long collaboration I did with Kate Davis in Glasgow at the CCA. And we started off at Emma Goldman's grave in Chicago. It's got the wrong date on it. It's like 1940 she died. But we did a reading of some of her anarchist writing. She's a huge influence on me. Emma Goldman.
And then
I did
some of these drawings.
Yeah, these were also all in the show. Virginia Woolf is a huge influence on me and her writing, and so I did a whole series which I called Tears, which were small watercolors mostly, and then with text. And this was like, I drew myself from the waiting piece, and then Emma Goldman looking kind of grim right next to me. So I'm kind of, creating these sort of pseudo histories, my connections to women who have hugely influenced me, but who are dead, but who live on, of course, through their work and their writing, and who are hugely important for my life and my work.
And the next several images are just some shots of some of the more interactive projects that you've done.
Yeah.
Like these. I like this here. I like your coveralls here.
Sort of a little bit Russian, constructivist kind of. Yeah, these are all installations. This was the latest. We just did this in Austria, where we dressed up as escapees from the cyber swamp, and went through the city of Graz, Austria, which is a tiny medieval city, and we talked to people about. We said we had escaped from the cyber swamp, and we wanted to know about what real life was like, and could they tell us about real life? So we talked to huge groups of students and old people in wheelchairs and women, and we were really trying to research and see what the everyday use of everyday technologies was, and most people didn't have them there. Really different than in America, where you walk through any city and everybody's like, and paying attention only to this, and yeah, it was really fun and really interesting. So I think that's the last. Right?
Yeah, so that's sort of like you just got an express grounding in
Really
40 years of faith wielding. When I get to go to an artist studio, it like starts with a 2-hour talk, and then sort of many more from there. So thank you, Faith. And so Beryl, look what I put first.
Wow.
There you are. And now for something completely different. I feel like you have to crane your neck. I'm so sorry. Do you want to look at this? This is how they're coming in order.
Right. You took some of text and commentary.
Yeah. So here you are working.
Oh, you don't have. Let me just. See
Here you are working at you're probably editing.
Oh, you didn't put any of the photographs in of Davao.
Oh, yeah, I did.
We'll get there. No, I meant that there was a structure that I don't see here.
So,
okay. Well,
is
anyway.
this what it looks like? This is what it used to look like to edit.
This was considered
video.
very portable. So this was speaking to a group of students at a college down in Florida after I had done my first video installation called Davao 1974, which
I have here.
Yeah, okay. That's actually a picture of the installation right now at the Tate in London.
Excellent.
And
So you got your career started with the medium of video, which at that time was very new.
yeah, I actually consider my first medium to be Radical Software, which was a print medium. And I say my first medium because I was a co-editor with another woman, and we did every aspect of the paper, from specking type to doing halftones to doing to figuring out the layout to cutting and pasting and all of that. I had come out of a literature background.
That was
actually,
really fun. Yeah.
and also art history. I had not gone to art school.
And what you produce, it's a broadside, basically. It's like a large
It was about
format.
the size of the New York Times. It kind of folded out. And
you're in New York City.
I'm in New York City, and the video Portapack came out in the mid-'60s to late '60s. A whole group of people were beginning to access this tool. And I was part of a kind of a think tank to imagine what the uses could be. Radical Software became the magazine, in a sense, that began to tell people who didn't know about the medium and that there were all these artists who were beginning to access it. It was a way to do an information exchange between artists all over the world. And at the same time, we were able to begin to talk about access, decentralization of information, changing the relationship of the broadcast medium to the individual sitting at home, which was a one-way delivery system. And all of a sudden you had this magnetic tape, instant feedback. So it was a very, very rich time. And actually, a lot of the ways we talked about it forecast the way 20 years later, 30 years later, people relate to the computer. So that was the beginning of my thinking about technology. And
we have a video upstairs in our media tech room where you see your, you've hold up some copies, I think.
oh,
And one thing that I love that you talked about, it was like also just a way to get information out. The number of copies were printed and that you drive around the country and deliver them out to colleges.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
From the trunk of a car. We,
Sort of a slow
it was
version of
Johnny,
the internet.
A kind of Johnny Appleseed. Yeah, definitely.
So Radical Software was the early 1970s.
It came out first in 1970. One of the things that was interesting for me about Radical Software is that when it talked about the relationship between the broadcast and the viewer in the room, it was saying we don't have to have this kind of relationship of one-way to, information delivery system. And so for me, multiple channel work, which some people were beginning to work in, was the way of taking people out of the living room and bringing them into a public space where they could take the module of the television set, sprinkle it around the room, play with time against itself, and or work with live feedback, things like that, to change that relationship. And ever since those days of working in Radical Software, that became very crucial to me, was to break the format, not just talk about radical things as an expression of an individual, which a lot of early works were about, like, you know, delivery, I think Richard said, what was it, delivery of, I can't remember the name of it, but there were a lot of things.
Television delivers us or something.
But it was still in the single channel format. I was really interested in kind of breaking that format. Anyway, 1974 became a really pivotal year for me in that I left the magazine folded. The people working on it wanted to get out and start actually doing the video that they had been thinking about and not just, you know, talking about it any longer, or, you know, we were getting antsy. And at the same time, while I was doing the magazine, I had a very close friend who was a weaver. And there was an article that came out, I remember, in Scientific American about the jacquard loom. And talking about it as a programming tool and an early programming tool. And this really fascinated me. And of course, when you were working in video, you were talking, how are you going to program the channels? So programming the loom, programming the channels, working with the print medium. All of a sudden, I thought, wow, this is amazing. In weaving, in video, in print, all the information is encrypted in lines. That's not an accident. These are this is an early technology to later technologies. This says something about the human being in terms of how we organize information. And that was the basis structurally of how I put Davao together. Though
That's this piece here.
Emotionally, it came from a whole other place. But in terms of how I decided to use the information that was recorded, this is actually my first weaving piece, although it's completely done with a video camera. And I say that because where was I going to get my references for working with multiple channels? But the loom was the most sophisticated technology, visual technology that we had, that talked about that program patterns according to a numerical structure. And so I looked to the loom as a way to program multiple channels of video. And your most basic thread structure is kind of like 1, 3, 2, 4, like a basic tabby structure, over, under, over, to create a basic thread. And in the Davao piece, I took channels 1 and 3 and 2 and 4. Each 1 and 3 each had a slightly different rhythm, but when the images appear, they're slightly out of sync with one another. 2 and 4, same thing. 1 and 3 starts outside the walls of the concentration, the former site of the concentration camp. And by the way, when I went to the concentration camp, I had a chance to be in Germany. It was 1974. As a young Jewish woman, I had to go to the camp. It was just like, I can't go to Germany without without taking this in as part of the experience of going to Germany. Survivors hadn't started to talk about anything at that point. Germans hadn't begun to talk about it. But everybody knew about it. So it was my way to kind of deal with the fact that I was going into this environment. So I went down to the camp and realized this is not Dachau 1940, 1945. This is Dachau 1974. This is a tourist place. So I shot it as a tourist place with people passing in their bikes, traffic outside of the camp, tourists walking towards me with guard towers behind them, conversing, people in the barracks conversing, murmuring, and created this 1, 3, 2, 4 shifting images throughout the work that take you from the outside of the camp, through the camp, across the bridge, to the crematoria, and then to a very quiet ditch with water in it and barbed wire on it. So it kind of takes you on a journey. It never really alludes to the past in terms of what happened there. It just deals with the architecture of the space, and it plays against memory and loss of memory. And that's really what the piece is about. But the weaving structure is what holds it together.
Yeah.
And it's the piece upstairs, text and commentary. I've always had a love-hate relationship with video. And when I did text and commentary, I wanted to get much more tactile. I wanted to make the image with my own hands for the camera. And that's part of what that piece was about. It's also, showing the whole process of the weaving, but it's also saying when you come into the gallery space and you see this ancient text facing the modern technology of video, there are lots of little programming changes that happen within the weavings that you don't really even see right away. The video kind of explicates that. So it was a way of having different kinds of materials talk about the same information, but because of the limitations of each medium, they only can say so much. And then there were the pictograms, which were also language and the development of language. That was a whole other thing that I was interested in. That's like a score pictographically of the 24 minutes of the work. And then you have the weaver's notations themselves. So and they're all describing the same thing, but within what each of the different mediums allows you to describe. So it was.
And when you knew you wanted to make this piece, you had to learn to weave.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yes. I don't know if everybody always understands that's your hands on the loom that you learned to do this.
After I did the magazine, while I was doing that, there was an incredible Y in YMCA in New York City, which had a loom room. With a wonderful
loom room.
A loom room it was incredible. It must have had 100 looms in it, and there was this wonderful.
Can you imagine?
Weaver, Claire Freeman, much older woman, and you just no nonsense. You walked into the room. You want to learn to weave. Here, do this, do this, do this, and in 3 sessions you were weaving, and that's really how I learned to weave. So for the text and commentary piece is actually one of my first things I ever wove.
Yeah, not bad.
For a
first timer.
Not bad for a
first timer.
Yeah, there are
of course, you've all seen it upstairs or will, so you get close. And while we were installing the exhibition, Faith was here first, and she was standing very close to those, and
I didn't touch them.
you touched them. I saw you, and she was studying.
I roll them up. I step on them.
My hands were clean.
Yeah. So, and then what you did do, though, is you did start weaving. I have a picture here of Babel. You did start weaving some of your canvases and painting on them.
After
a number of years.
After this piece, I decided I had enough of video for a while. So it really was always a kind of push-pull with the medium. So I decided that I wanted to weave. I thought I loved painting. but I didn't know how to paint. But I did know at this point how to make my own canvases. And I was fascinated by the grid, and I was fascinated by the point in going from an oral tradition to a written tradition in terms of the history of man. And I decided that based on a 4-point grid structure, I was going to create a language, an abstract language, that, you know, an A would be, if you had 4 points on a grid, an A might be the upper point, and a B might be right under it, and a C under it, and a D under it, and an E and F, the points 1 and 2, and then 2 and 3, and 3 and 4 for all the different letters of the alphabet. And then I was interested, because I was interested in technology. I looked to the biblical text of Babel in Genesis as a very early text about technology and about human power and a God-based universe moving away from a God-based universe to a human-based universe. It's kind of all there in these 2 very tiny paragraphs. And so I decided I was going to create a room of these Babel texts based on this language that I had developed. So in a way, you're just going in, you don't know what you're looking at in terms of, you're just seeing language that is abstracted of its direct meaning. To me, it meant something. It motivated me to do it, because I kept thinking about this story. And it led to a much later work.
Which we will,
here's
some other, maybe I'll go to that if you don't mind. And then go backwards again.
Right, okay. So
this is a much more recent work.
Right, this was in 2006, 2007. That canvas, that hand-woven canvas with the language, I was thinking about what I had done. And I decided that I wanted to make a scroll.
And now this is digital.
Using the language.
Now it's...
Well, it was in Photoshop on the computer, so the whole scroll, which turned out to be about 16, it was done in 3 strips, and it turned out to be 16 feet wide by 6 feet high. And this is the language, like this is the word for and, so you have an A in the upper corner, an N would be the first and second and fourth position, and a D would be the fourth position, so A, N, D. And within the language, there were windows that I are here that I began to
this
tell
is something
the story.
that moves, like it moves on the screen.
Well, there's this, and then it faces. So after I made this in the computer, I thought, gee, I animated it on a video screen, but I hadn't printed it out yet. You're looking at the printed out version of it. So first it was just on a video screen, kind of just being scrolled past you, and I thought, well, nobody can see what the scroll actually is. So then I printed out the scroll, and the 2 things face one another. And actually, in a recent installation, I reintroduced the hand-woven canvas as a kind of...
And then to show just what, because both of you have such a range in your work. This is a music multimedia performance for theater space.
Right. This was a work I did with my husband, who's composer, Steve Reich. We did a piece called The Cave, and this is actually, again, it comes right out of the text and commentary piece, in that it's 5 screens. The screen size is altered so that to create a different kind of spatial feeling on the stage. But and the technology was developing a little bit more, where the computer, you could begin to do things that were a little more sophisticated, that I had to kind of do more in an analog kind of way, that I did, which is when I went into the hand-woven canvas for a while. So this was a piece, I'm not really, this is like you could talk for hours about this piece, I think. I could talk for hours about this piece, but it was just... Are
you up for it?
But basically we asked 3 groups of people, Israeli Jews, Palestinian Muslims, and Americans. Who for you is Abraham, Sarah, Hagar, Ishmael, and Isaac? And this is from the first act. This is Ephraim Isaac. He's an Ethiopian Jew, and I took little parts of... Every time you see a person in the course of this work, they're in both an oral and a visual portrait of themselves. So there he is, but then a part of you could at that point just begin to grab an image from the video. That was this was 1990. You know, where for home, I mean, if you went into a studio, you could do a lot more. But for for an artist to be able to afford that, this was, you know, just totally homegrown. And by the way, in working with technology, for me, it's not always important for a lot of people. But I've always had to do all, and I mean all, my technical work. I've never had an assistant. I just have what I can afford to buy, have it at home, and work on it. And even if it's going to be, you know, a 2-hour work on stage.
And isn't that interesting, because what you're pointing to is that you're thinking through the making, you're thinking with your hands. You have to be doing it yourself. I
just felt that if you're going to do a work on technology, this is me. A lot of people have done other things quite successfully, not with this attitude, that I never use special effects packages. It's just something I have to construct as much as I can with the camera and what the program that, let's say, I'll be working in, which I work a lot in After Effects, which allows you to layer. But essentially, you know, you're making, this wasn't in anything. Anyway.
Yeah, and then I'll
moving right along.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, but I just actually wanted to plop it here, because this is a work of yours called Florence. Now, of course, we're showing all you stills. This is a video work, like a lot what we've shown. These are moving images. This is something you experience with in time and with time. But this image, specifically this still with the kind of weaving of lines and text. I mean, both of you, even what we've just looked at tonight, text is so important in both of your work. And I think that's remarkable, because you're both using language, and it's a tool. It can be an abstraction.
Well, it's amazing to me that both to weave and text come from the same Latin root. To weave, actually, and textus or texera or texo were, you know, it's like text was a web, you know, that was the origin of the word. And, you know, you have things like who was in Odysseus, who was the wife, Penelope.
Weaving her web,
weaving the
taking
thing.
it apart every night.
Was that
Right.
I mean, it's interesting saying
so you have
a
the
web.
whole narrative thing, which
Absolutely.
when I started working in the multiple channel thing, I thought, you know, it's not just metaphorical. It's real. It's tactile. It's real. It's tangible. These structures are actually able to be used to convey a narrative if you order it in a certain way, if you take your cues from this ancient tool. Anyway, this piece is the first piece that I ever made where I kind of used, I cut out from waterfalls and a blizzard. In the program that I use, I was able to cut out strips and rearrange them on the screen, kind of like a weaving, or some kind of structure that resembles that. Although, anyway, and then words from Florence. This is a piece called Florence, based on. I don't know how much time we have.
Well, I mean, we're fine, but we'll
start.
I was thinking. I mean, were you thinking about sort of a web of language in any way with crocheted environment? I mean, you said you were a comparative literature major, and I mean, some people think of it as a kind of web. Like somebody said to me yesterday, the sort of spiderweb piece in the show, and I was like, what? There's no, what do you? Oh, because I think of it maybe slightly different as a sort of sculptural environment.
I actually think of it as kind of drawing in a certain way, and the students I was working with. They're like, let's do the Brooklyn Bridge. I said, okay, Brooklyn Bridge. I was teaching them how to crochet at the same time. And like, how do you make the Brooklyn Bridge? Okay, whatever. But I mean, I use text. It's going through my head all the time. And I think I'm playing with ideas from text. I've always been interested very much in William Blake and how Blake combined text and image in this really interesting dialectical way. And I don't know if I can apply that to the crocheted environment, really, in terms of text, that particular piece. but a lot of other pieces. I
Yeah,
actually
yes.
write a lot on my work.
Which we
and
saw.
Right now I've been working on a new piece which I call Meander, which basically is just meandering. To me it's based on the illuminated sort of carpet pages, that they called it, in the Celtic manuscripts. And which are incredibly complex, and a lot of the kind of interweaving and interlacing comes, of course, from weaving, but also comes very much from Arabic influences and comes from textiles. And they actually call them carpet pages because the pages are because they look like they're woven from some kind of, like some kind of Persian carpet or something like that. It's really interesting, but also the kind of writing, for example, Arabic writing is an image basically, and I think that's also very relevant to Hebrew writing, where you weren't allowed to make graven images, and so you used the writing, was also a pictogram in a certain way, also had all this symbolic value and just.
Well, Arabic became much more. Hebrew
Much
never
more
really,
so,
yeah.
yeah.
Much more so. Hebrew a little bit in terms of
Yeah.
illuminated manuscripts and stuff
Yeah.
like that, but not to the extent.
Yeah.
But as in Arabic.
When you were we were speaking when you were here installing Faith and speaking of language, you said I would ask you some questions and you would say you said to me a few times, oh, I can't tell you, I'm working on my memoir, like that you're writing your memoir. So again, sort of putting down these stories in language. I think we consider art to be so visual, and the text here is so heavy and so interesting to me, and the resonances between both of your work. And I also think that time and duration here. We're looking at your Davao piece and text and commentary, the making, and also we didn't have a slide of, but your very famous performance, Waiting, which is about this is time. Do you have anything that you might want to add about the use of time, whether it be in time as duration video and how that's experienced in person, or notion of that waiting? And I don't know, I'm sort of speaking in circles, and I apologize, but I'm thinking also just about the sort of time and making art for such a very long time. I was very interested tonight, as I told you, there might be a fair number of students in the audience, and thinking about that, you're not just making art for now, you have to think about this, making art and being a creative person for 40, 50 years, one hopes, of making. And is there anything there for you to comment on, my ramblings? My extreme ramblings?
Well, when I did a piece like Davao, in a way, I was thinking of it as, if you look at like a weaving score, it really,
Is it called a score? A weaving score?
Yeah, a weaver's notation.
Yeah.
It actually looks like a score of
It looks
music.
like a score, yeah.
And you could actually sing the melody if you wanted to, of a twill pattern. It may just be, notes going up on a scale, but, theoretically, you could do that. But in terms of the piece itself, which I can't, which I haven't shown you the moving time of it, with the 1s and 3s and 2s and 4s and a rhythm for each channel, it was in a way like a musical composition. I had played piano as a kid; that was my first language. So that my approach to video was measuring time. In Davao, in text and commentary, you'll see these pauses. Well, you have to have rests. In music, you have in weaving, you have information and no information in order to make pattern. Otherwise, it would be noise.
Okay.
So if you didn't go under over, those are how you do that. Depends on what patterns you see, but if you didn't, you have to have things covering other things. Those are the rests. So that kind of thinking was definitely in how those early works were edited. And in this work, which is about reading in a funny kind of way, the words go very slowly down. They're kind of like a concrete poetry. And they each have their own level of transparency and weight and time for every word that falls in this piece and in another piece that I did. So time is how you receive that time and how what mood it puts you in and how you're thinking about it. So in a way, like any kind of like dance and music and video and film, those are, you know, time-based mediums where that becomes definitely an expression of the artist. You know, and that'll vary tremendously depending on the artist, but it's a time-based, those are time-based mediums. And
of course. I'm gonna invite questions now, I think. Okay, everybody, get ready. I'd like to invite some questions from you. Does anybody have any questions right now? The question is how much of your early lives impact or affect the work that you make now, the work that you've been making?
You'll have to read
It's the biography. You have to read her memoir. When does that come out? But I would, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Maybe is there a specific, I guess we saw it sort of in your work.
Are you looking at me?
Faith. I know. Can we bring these down a tiny bit? Would you mind?
Yes, I mean.
You talked about the nature and the painting of the leaf.
Yeah, and you know, and how, and what I was taught also, you know, that we were taught all kinds of handicrafts and making making everything ourselves, and you know, knitting and sewing and embroidery and scissor cuts, and you know, I was brought up by Germans basically, you know, in a kind of a Rudolf Steinerish sort of a way, and you know, we made everything ourselves, ceramics. I didn't even know, you know, really what art was, but I did have a book of Käthe Kollwitz's drawings, which I used to copy, and for some reason I had a little book of Cézanne's paintings. I knew nothing, you know, I was in South America in the middle of Paraguay. I knew nothing about what art was in terms of anything but, you know, art was to praise God, basically. And, you know, but Cézanne totally captivated me. And why? Because of the color. I was, you know, I love Cézanne's color, still do, always will. But, you know, we would always out in the wilderness drawing and painting. So for me, the visual, you know, intense visual perception of color and shapes and forms, you know, they just kind of really are metaphors for me for everything. So yeah, it did hugely influence me.
Beryl, do you have anything that you want to add there? You did mention the piano, which is like, I didn't know that. That's quite remarkable.
Yeah.
well, I think, you know, I remember at around the age of 12, I said to myself, I'm an artist, but I had no idea at all what medium I was going to work with. My sister was a painter. She was younger than I, and she knew she was going to paint. And when I look back, I think it was just maybe an atmosphere in the house, you know, a way of thinking that was kind of in the household that allowed, and also I think a lot when I became, after college, during college, I think there was an environment coming up in the late 60s, early 70s, was that whatever you want to do, you can do it. There was a very free atmosphere at that time. And that you could learn whatever you wanted to learn. So I didn't go to art school, but if I wanted to learn to weave, I'd ask somebody, hey, where am I going to learn to weave? Go up to the Y, there's an amazing woman there, you know, that kind of thing. Or if I wanted to learn to work with a computer program, then I'd pick up the phone and somebody would come to the studio for a couple of days and walk me through a program, you know, that kind of thing. So certainly where you went to, and where you know, sought the information, how that you had to seek the information was really important. And there was also a thing, because video was a new medium, that also was part of it. You were discovering along with a lot of other people, and they were all all kind of actually helping one another.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it was a big thing for feminist art too. The Porta Pack, the minute the Porta Pack was available at Cal Arts, everybody was out with a Porta Pack and just taking, a zillion videos. And it became a really important medium for feminism, as did performance.
Right.
And, so I think that was really, and also the 60s, the flower children were making tie-dye and crafts and macrame. Have you seen how much macrame there is in that show? Okay? So don't laugh. Macrame is, but it was like, that was a huge influence, because everybody was making their own, everything. Houses, yurts, whatever, trying to raise pigs. These city kids who knew nothing were making communes and, trying to grow food. I mean, in some ways, it's very much like sort of the craftivism,
Now.
Food movement. Yeah, we're back there. We just don't, we really need the politics on top of it, too. Heavy duty, man. We need that. But, so.
Okay. Yes, here?
I don't mean to, that's a very important question. And
The question's about Woman House.
Yeah, and I've actually been trying to write about that with Mira Shore. You might be familiar with her work and her writing. She's a fantastic writer. And Mira and I were graduate students at Cal Arts and graduate students in the feminist art program doing Woman House. So we've been working together for ever since then, really thinking about the histories and thinking about what really happened and writing about it and, giving talks about it. And, it totally, of course, did influence and change our lives in so many ways. Particularly, I mean, for me, partly it was, as it turned out, the two iconic pieces that I'm known for, I made in Woman House, the waiting piece and the womb room. I can never get away from them.
Yeah.
So
Imagine all of you in the audience, students, if you made two works while you were a student that became very, very well known, or like, I mean, it's somewhat remarkable.
But
I mean,
from which you can't get away.
You can't get away from, especially if you've been making work for a number of years, most of which is probably just as important to your own work as an artist. And Woman House is this big moment, this big important thing that is now quite mythic. And I'm sure when you were working on it, it was like, yeah, we're doing this thing all together. It's going to be fantastic. And as the years go on, there's so much more history added on to it.
Yeah, but it's, I mean, it was an incredible experience. Cal Arts had just been built, and then there was an earthquake, and all the floors were like this. So nobody could actually move into the new Cal Arts building in Valencia for the first two semesters. And so we had to find someplace else to work, and to do our schooling. And so, Paula Harper, the art historian, came up with this idea, and and so we worked on Women House for the first 1.5 semesters. And, so every day we were there. And it was cold, none of the bathrooms worked, we had to go down to the local gas station to pee, where nobody welcomed us. And, I mean, it was really, we had to rebuild the house, we had to glaze all the windows, because it was completely wrecked. And, so we learned a lot of skills, right? We learned all of these building skills and making skills, and I was the graduate assistant, so I was like, driving everybody, and, every night we'd have performance workshop, because we did a whole bunch of performances for Woman House, in which the house was open for a month, and so we also were led people around, and we were the curators, and we performed 2 or 3 nights a week to sell out audiences. So it was hugely, took up, my entire time as a grad student for the first, pretty much for the first year of my grad student. Did I answer your question? And there's been a lot of sort of copies of Woman House in very interesting ways. Because really, to me, it was this incredible experience of collaboration, and I think that's a very big cornerstone of feminist art is collaboration and learning how to work with each other, which was very hard, very hard, and often very painful, but also, of course, incredibly joyous, and especially when so many people came to visit, and changed.
Both of you, I'm sorry,
No, I'm
off
done.
at the end. In the 1970s, it's remarkable to me actually that you're both sitting here with me and that both of your work is in the show, because you both were sort of really at the forefront of two different but related things. Beryl, you were like really one of the pioneers of video art, which is like a locus in New York City, and it's happening. And Faith, you're out in the West Coast in the absolute locus of what became second wave feminism, feminist art, which is sort of both of those, let's say, mediums and subjects is really, it's why we are here today in terms of what artists can do and what they're doing. And you are both still actively making work, obviously. You are sitting here, you are still artists, you've been making art since that time. And I would say that there's been something of a rediscovery. Now, to you, it probably doesn't feel like a rediscovery because you're just working along. And I think the way that we look at this from the outside in is sort of, text and commentary, this very signal piece of, multi-channel video work, bringing in different material, sort of recently kind of came back to light and was, that piece debuted at Leo Castelli Gallery in the 1970s, and then recently was shown like a few years ago, and you had showed Alderson. We sort of, when I saw this piece, along with many people saw it's like this remarkable work.
Yeah.
And it just shows like this very early video artwork. Video is not that old, and then with Faith, it's the same. Sort of, you've just recently had a retrospective of your work, of the kind of constantly renewing interest in feminism. I wonder how, from the chairs you're in now, what this sort of looks like. And we don't have a lot of time left, but to me, it's incredible.
Well, it's funny. It's the interest in the digital world that younger people are into now that made them interested in text and commentary. The hand-woven pieces, which I'd never shown actually, there was some young group of people in Bushwick who somehow heard about these hand-woven canvases, who showed it.
Bushwick.
Showed it for the first time.
Yes.
So I think that that period is still relevant.
Very.
Hugely.
So that, and people
Yeah.
are looking to that period. That's,
Yeah. And similarly, I was incredibly overjoyed and moved by the responses I got from millennials, whoever they are.
I think there's some.
And young people.
Yeah.
People. To very early drawings and painting work of mine that I'm showing in the retrospective. And it was, they were like, that's awesome, look at that stuff. That's like menstruation and vulvas and, this is really cool. Whereas in the early 70s and then a little bit later in the 70s, I can't tell you how reviled we were for making, and I was also particularly reviled for the kinds of imagery I was making, for the kind of, sort of the cunt imagery, and then the, and you're working in watercolors, and you're drawing, the mythic stuff, the goddesses, it was essentialism.
Yes.
And that word, the millennials don't know that word, so don't tell them. But it was a completely different reception of the work,
Yes.
and it was very gratifying, I have to say.
Oh, yeah.
And thank you, Shannon.
Yeah.
Shannon, my curator, is in the audience. Yes.
I have to do that thing where I have to stop us and say thank you both so much for being with us here tonight, and thank you for joining us.